So for this tutorial, I have two different pictures of Lorikeets, which I've used as my inspiration. I took this picture and then I took this picture, oops, and I used them as my guidelines for drawing my own Lorikeet. I will attach the PDF for that. So I'm only going to use three colors. I'm going to use cadmium yellow, cadmium red, and cobalt blue. And I'm going to mix the orange and the green using those colors. So step one is to lightly go over all your lines with a kneaded eraser and make them very nice and light. Step two, we are going to do flat colors in all the areas. And we always start with our lightest color. So I'm going to start with my cadmium yellow. Check it on my test sheet. Pull that over a little bit so you can see better. And I'm going to go in and just with a flat color, go over the little bit of yellow in the tips of the beak. And he has an area behind the eye, which is actually a yellowy green. So I'm going to make yellow my base color for that. So it's just a light color. I'm not trying to worry about my most vibrant shade of yellow at this point. There's also some yellow in the breast area. So I'm going to drop it in, put some clean water on my brush, move the paint that I've already put on there, and I'm going to keep putting water on my brush so it'll flow very slowly. You can already see how it's very nice and bright where I dropped the paint in, and it's slowly moving. That's going to look absolutely gorgeous. Now I need to let that yellow area dry before I drop in the red on top, but I can go in and do the blue as long as I don't accidentally touch my yellow. So I'm going to flip my work over. Normally I tape my work down on a board. I didn't tape this down. I'm not sure quite why. I guess I was thinking of other things. But I usually tape it down. That way it's much easier to turn it and you don't have to worry about wrecking parts. Now, cobalt blue. Because this is just the flat layer, I'm not wetting my paper first. Now I'm putting clean water on my brush and I'm going to let that flow. I'm going to do the same thing on this edge. Now I have to be very careful I don't touch where that yellow is. So being super, super, super careful. If it touches, you'll have a happy accident. It's not the end of the world. It's just a happy accident. We learn from them. We all make them. Drop in a little bit more color there. And now clean water on my brush, fill in that space. So it's going to flow down and it's going to flow from the top as well. So I'm just going to let the paint do what it wants to do. I'm not going to force it to do anything. Turning it right side up now will give the chance for this paint to move down into the middle. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Again, trying not to touch my yellow with my hand. Now it's really important that you don't do too big of an area at once, because if you do and it starts to dry, those hard lines you will not be able to erase. They will be permanent lines. So before that dries, I have to wet the area around it to let that paint flow, and that way I'll have a nice soft effect instead of the hard lines. So again, doing my absolute best to not touch the yellow. And again, I don't want to touch the yellow. If you're worried about touching the yellow, just wait until the yellow is completely dry and then do your blue. That way, if you touch it, it won't run and you won't end up with greens. Now I'm trying to get a flat color, so I'm not dropping it in. I can move it a little bit with my brush because the idea is I'm going to end up with one tone throughout the whole area down here. And I do have a lighter area in there, and that's right, that's quite okay. It's a little bit darker there, and that's just fine. It's going to look different when it dries, so I have to let that dry. While I'm waiting for my blue area to dry, I'm going to start mixing my green. And I've got space right here where you can see it on my palette. The blue is got a stronger pigment than the yellow. So what you will find is you will need very little blue with a ratio of quite a bit more yellow. So I'm going to drop in lots and lots and lots of yellow here. And then mix it. That's a nice tone. You can tell it's quite thick. I don't want it very thick. I want it not as thick as milk, and right now it's looking quite milky. That's tested on my test paper. That's about the right amount of pigment. So now I'm going to go in to my green areas. Again, I don't want any hard lines, so I have to work quickly. This is supposed to be fast flowing. If I had taped this down, I wouldn't be having to touch it with my fingers. And work always looks better if it's been taped down, because then you have these beautiful white borders on all sides of the page. It just really adds to it, really makes it look more like a finished piece when you're done. And also, because watercolor paper is absorbent, it will pick up whatever oils you have in your hands. So it's a good idea to not touch your paper. Now that, I'm just gonna let that dry, because the idea is this is just the flat color underneath. This area under here is also blue. So I'm going to drop in cobalt blue. And I'm going to do my absolute best to not touch the green. If you're worried about touching your green, just wait till your green dries and then do this blue part. Okay, good. Looking good. I need to let that dry. I can do the red on the beak, so I'm going to turn my bird upside down. That way I can work on, oops, the beak area without accidentally messing up the areas I've just done. I want it a little bit brighter. Test it on my test sheet first. Watercolors do dry lighter, so you want to make sure, you just need to be aware of the fact that they're going to dry lighter. So if you are unhappy with the color you got, don't worry about it, you can just do it on a second layer. I've got a cauliflower effect already happening there. So just suck up some of that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom part. Very nice. And I'm going to just wet this area, slowly dragging, lightly dragging the red over so it just travels into there. And then at the very, very tip, I'm going to put clean water only, just clean water. I don't want it to cover up the yellow completely, but I don't want it to stop. I don't want it to be a line between where the yellow starts and the red starts. And I need to let that dry as well. Now you can see my bottom beak is quite a bit brighter than my top beak, but that's okay. I'll just fix that up in the next layer. I can go in and do the same thing with the red now. I have to test to make sure this is dry. If it's dry, use the back of your hand. If it's dry, it will feel room temperature. If it's not dry, it will feel cool to the touch. So if it is cool to the touch, leave it longer, even if it looks dry. And that way you won't end up with any strange cauliflower effects. You won't end up with any strange bleeding lines. I want my red to be fairly wet, so I'm putting some pigment there, some paint, and now I'm going to drop in a couple drops of water. Excuse me. There we go. That's what I want. That's what I want. And because this is layer number 1, I'm not going to worry about the fact that it's quite a pale shade compared to the blue. We're going to brighten that up with a couple extra layers. Clean water on my brush now, wet that whole area, and wet more area than I'm planning, just to let that red flow, and it's flowing nicely already. Good, very good. Okay, I need to let this dry. I'm going to put a second layer of yellow in now, and to do this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the area first. So clean brush, clean water on my brush, only clean water. This time I'm going to touch the blue area, and I'm not going to make it an even line. I'm going to do a wiggly line along my edges of the yellow and the blue and the green. Now I'm going to put cadmium yellow, testing it first to make sure it's bright enough, and I do want it fairly bright. Yep. And I'm going to drop it in this time. So it's going to move around, flow a bit. And when I was talking about the wiggly line, I realized I didn't do a wiggly line up there. So there, I've just added a wiggly line. Now it might end up that, oh, apparently I didn't wet all of it. It might end up that I end up with a flat color again, which just goes to show me that I need to put fewer dots of yellow in. And if that's the case, I'll do a third layer on top because it's still not incredibly bright. Now, one nice thing you can do is if you are unhappy with how much paint you've put on your work, you can dab with a paper towel or a Kleenex. So I'm gonna dab some of that just to lighten some areas. Q-tips work really well. That's just going to lighten it, and then I'll be able to put really dark yellow over top as a third layer. Now I don't want my yellow to get polluted too much, so I am going to leave that area, but my red down here is dry now, so I'm going to put in my second layer of red. And this time, again, I'm going to wet the entire area, being quite generous with my water, and going into the yellow area again. And I want my pigment nice and bright. That's gonna be a little bit brighter, okay. Now I'm dropping, I'm just dabbing. I'm not doing a flat wash like I did before. Pardon me. We're gonna let that flow, see how it looks. I feel daring enough to do the same thing in the blue area. Now remember what I said, if you're scared of touching the boundaries, leave it till it dries. I'm scared of touching this boundary here, so I'm just gonna do this top blue area. And because I am tilting my paper this way, I'm less worried about the blue traveling into the yellow in that direction. I think I should be pretty safe in that direction. Oh, I'm not. Well, yes, I am. I did get some yellow. Do you see that I got some yellow there? but that's okay because the cobalt blue is such a strong pigment that I know it will cover up the yellow. I might just have a little bit of a green tinge, and that's okay. Now I'm definitely going to let that dry. We'll see what it looks like. So now that this is dried, I can see that I've got quite a hard line here that I need to get rid of. So I'm going to use a stipple brush. This is a brush that's really good for when you're trying to make sand or the ocean spray. It works really, really well, and you can just dab it. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrub this area, and those are actually little pieces of the paper that have come off. I just want to wipe as much of that away as possible. So I'm just going to wipe it with my hands. I'm just trying to get rid of all those little pieces of paper. So I've softened it a bit, and now when I re-wet that area and drop the red and the yellow in, the paper is going to absorb quite a bit of the pigment in that area, and that'll be just fine. So I'm wetting that entire area, starting on the yellow end, and I'm going to take that cadmium yellow, drop it in over top, and then there is some yellow in the bird's chest, so I'm going to drop some more in there, and I'm going to leave it. I'm going to do the exact same thing with this blue area on top. I'm going to re-wet it and drop blue in on top, and so we're going to keep getting more and more layers of a mottled blue as opposed to a flat blue color. So I'm just going to take the cobalt blue, drop it in. And I actually quite like this area over here where there was yellow. It's making a nice difference. Okay, we're just going to let that area dry. And I'm going to move on to the next blue area. I am going to turn this around simply so I'm not putting my hand in the yellow. Making sure that I'm only using clean water in my brush. And I'm going to wet into this yellow area just a bit. So we're going to end up with a transition area that isn't the straight line. We'll get rid of that straight line where the yellow was. Oh, I need this to be quite blue. That's the right amount of pigment there. Yep. Okay, we're just gonna let that do its thing, and we're gonna see how it flows. Now I'm going to do the same thing in the green area. So I'm gonna turn my bird this way. And I'm going to wet into the yellow up here at the top, simply so we lose that transition line as well. Now the green I mixed, so it looks like I'm almost out of green here on my palette. So I need to mix more. Testing that on my paper to make sure it's the right green. And I'm going to do a little bit of a different technique there. I'm just going to do some areas where I'm using brush strokes and some areas where I'm just dropping the color in. So I'll do some brush strokes. My paper's drying very quickly, so I need to work fast here. And now that I've wet that paper, I realize that my green is not thick enough, so I need to mix some more here. That green is a little bit on the blue side, so I need to keep mixing. That's closer. Check on my test paper, and it is close enough. So I'm doing a little bit of each here. I'm doing some strokes and some dabbing. And I'm going to take some yellow and drop it on top of the green while it's still wet. So we get more of a transition going from the yellow to the green there. Okay, I need to not play with that. And I've got it pooling a couple of spots here, so I'm gonna suck it up with my brush. There. This is a lovely technique, however, it does take a lot of time simply because I need to let all my layers dry. And my green is getting fairly flat. It seems to be just sort of filling up the whole area. So I'm just going to dab some, so we have some areas that are a little bit lighter. Yeah, that's better. Just gives me a little bit of a variation, so it's not all the same value of green. And of course, this isn't the final layer, so it will look better on the next layer. That's dry now, and I'm going to do another layer on top of everything. I'm going to start just at the top and work my way down this time. So first I'm going to do the blue area, covering a little bit of this yellow. And I'll move this so you can see. There we go. I'm gonna cover up my painting though with my test sheet there just to protect my work. It's always a good idea to cover the work that you've already done, where your hand is going to be. So truly, this is the best thing. That way when I'm resting my hand on the paper, like that, I'm not actually touching my work. Very important, especially if you find that you have oils in your hands. It's very easy for those oils to get transferred to your paper. Watercolor paper is very absorptive. So absorbent, I think is the right word I'm looking for. So you do need to be careful of that. So I think this is layer 3. I think this is layer 3. I've kind of lost track here, but this is just the way you do it. You have to take your time, do separate layers, not muck around with it after it's wet and you've put the paint in. You literally need to let it do its own thing, dry on its own, go back, and then decide if you need to add another layer. So most of my paintings take about a week for me to do because so much time has to be in between my layers, just letting it dry. Now you can cheat. You can use a hair dryer and you can use a heat gun. If you use a heat gun, you just need to make sure that you don't have the heat gun so close to your work that it will actually burn your paper. I've burned paper before. And if you use a blow dryer, you have to be aware of the fact that it's blowing a lot of air, so it will literally move the paint and you will actually see the paint moving. So you have to be careful of what you are painting because you might be really unhappy with that movement. You might not. The movement might be great, but you just have to be aware of the fact that especially if you point the blow dryer directly down on your work, it's going to spread the paint in all different directions. So just something to keep in mind when you're trying to make those sorts of decisions. I'm very fortunate now that I live in Australia. For most of the year, I can put my work outside and in 5 minutes it's dry. It's absolutely lovely that way. However, I live in Western Australia, which is, people from Western Australia are called sand gropers, and I understand why, because there's so much sand in my backyard. If I leave any paintings out there, it doesn't take very long before they're covered in sand. Okay, so I'm dropping in more yellow in the yellowish area. And I'm going to drop in more red in the reddish area. Just try to get right up along the edge there because I missed. Now I am going to get some cauliflower effects there because I just added more water to an area that's already starting to dry, but that's all right. And I'm going to do the same thing in this boundary here just to soften the line. Add a little bit of red up there. Now I'm having to switch how I'm holding my brush, so my paint marks are not all in the same direction and not all in the same shape. Now I just have water on my brush and I'm just moving it a little bit with just water on the brush there. Looks good. I'm going to do the same thing in this area here. I'm going to drop in some yellow right over top just to soften those marks, and a little bit more up there. Now is that dry? It's dry. I'm going to drop some yellow in this area right here without wetting the area first. So, because now I'm just trying to get some actual texture. I'm trying to change the values of the yellow that I have. So I'm trying to add a brighter value than the base flat color. That's looking better. Okay, testing the green area. My green area is dry. And now I am not going to wet the area. I'm going to just drop in my green color, directly on top. And I have to change the direction of my brush so my marks are not all the same. The other way I could do this area, if I wanted to spend a lot more time, is to make actual brush strokes that look like feathers, all in the same direction, over and over and over again. It would look beautiful, it would be wonderful detail, and it would take about 10 times longer than the way I'm doing this. So the reason why I'm doing it this way is because this is just supposed to be a quick, fun Next step is to do some directional feathers. So what I'm doing is lines over top of the layers I've already done. The blue lines at the top go up, then across and around the eye. Then underneath the eye they mostly go down, but there are a few that also go along the edge. And I'm going right into the red area, and you'll see my blue lines went right into the yellow area, and then my yellow lines go right into the green area. So I still haven't switched to a smaller brush. I'm still using the same brush. And I will show you exactly how to do these lines. First, I'm mixing quite a bit of green here because I have a large area to do. Add a little bit of yellow into that, actually quite a bit of yellow. Make sure I get the same shade green that I have been using all this time. And that's a little thick, so check my paper, that's the right shade green. Okay, so I'm still using the same brush, but I'm trying to just use the tip now. And make some directional lines. I'm not trying to fill the whole area, I'm just trying to give the appearance of more of a feather shape. Just looking for my smaller reference photo, just so I can see they are going down, and then actually we'll get some of the round edges of the feathers in there, so I can start doing shapes almost like V's, because then it truly does look more like feathers. Whereas up in the blue area you weren't able to see the bottom of the feathers because they're so tightly overlapping, but here, now I'm only doing this quickly because this is supposed to be a quick painting. This isn't supposed to be a painting that takes 10 hours. If that was the case, I'd do every feather individually, and I would do the depth of the feathers by putting dark colors in between them, but that's not my aim at this point. I'm gonna do the blue. So some of these I'm giving the edge of the feathers to. And now the red feathers, they're a little different. I can tell from my reference photo that they actually go more across like this, and that red does not seem like the correct red. It is, but I must not have had a clean brush, because I can tell just by looking at it that, yeah, I can tell just by looking at what I had there that there must have been another color on my brush. One more reason why it's very important to make sure you have clean water and a dirty water. So you rinse in your dirty, then you add more clean. Now I have to be careful I don't smudge my blue. Normally I'd have my paper covering my blue, but because it's wet, I can't do that. So I'm gonna tip my picture this way, and I'm gonna start up here. I've left a lot of space between my lines, so none of my lines are very close together, and the reason why I've done that is so I can put yellow in between. Okay, so again, doing my absolute best to not touch my wet work. Now I'm going to make lots of yellow lines in between my reds to show that the yellow is actually coming from this area but isn't just in that area. And the yellow is also going horizontal, whereas all the other feathers are going much more vertical. And in some spots the yellow comes almost to the middle, so I'm just going to add some in there. And even if you can't see my lines, it will definitely change the color of that area from a red to an orangey red, and that's the effect we're going for. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to take a step back, look at my work, make sure that I'm happy with it, and step back, because, and I am. Excellent. So now we're going to fix the beak up. I'm going to tilt my paper so I don't touch what I've already done. So I'm now adding yellow right on top of the red. And I'm adding yellow here right on top of the red as well. Clean water on my brush and just softening that part so the yellow actually comes up to part of the beak. Being very careful now, I'm going to add some bright red at the other end of the beak. Cleaning my brush so now it's just a little bit damp, and I'm just going to soften those lines as well. Okay. Now we're ready to do the background. In the background, we're going to do a really fun technique that's called the glad wrap technique. In Canada, we use saran wrap. So you're just using whatever brand it is, Glad Wrap, Cling Wrap, Saran Wrap, depending on which country you're in. One thing I have discovered though with this technique is you don't want to use the environmentally friendly green wrap. It just doesn't stick as well. I've also discovered that smaller pieces are better, and you want to do a small area at a time instead of trying to do like this entire top and this entire side in one piece. It's just not going to work nearly as nicely. The other thing is, if you haven't already, make sure you tape your paper down on all four sides. Couple of reasons. One, this is a wet on wet technique, so we're going to add a lot of water, which means your paper might start to buckle. Two, the Glad Wrap, Saran Wrap will stick much better if the paper doesn't lift off the board. So that's what we're going to do. This technique you are going to use, wet the area first. Now you do have to take your time when you're going around the edges of your painting, because the last thing you want is for your beautiful background to accidentally go over all your hard work that you've done with your bird. And I apologize for putting my head in front of the camera there. Okay, so I've done an area from here up and over, and that's as far as I'm going to wet at one time. Then I'm going to drop my colors in. I'm going to use the blue and the green, and that's it. And I'm not going to worry too much about how green it is. So I'm just mixing some green off the camera here. So I could actually mix the colors right on the paper. So I can actually take the yellow and add the yellow right in there right now. Okay, so now that it's done that, and I've dropped lots in, now here's the fun part. You lay the Glad Wrap over top, and I'm just smushing with my fingers. Lots of different areas, and it almost gives it a stained glass effect. It's really, really cool. Now, because I've only wet where I want the paint to go, I know that this part of the bird is protected, and I can tell just by the way that the Glad Wrap is sitting is that it's not actually attached to the bird, which means my beak will be safe. Now I'm going to work on the next little area. I think I'll go across the top. So I'm going to go in here, and my brush wasn't clean, so I see I've got greenish water. That's totally fine. Makes it easier for you to see the area I'm wetting. It's totally fine for my water to be green because I'm going to do a blue and green background. That way it'll look like sky and leaves. Okay, so I've wet that whole area. I'm just going to drop in some blue, drop in some green and some yellow to make green. See how it's mixing with the blue I already had in there to make a green. And I am going to put dots, lots of dots, close to my boundary, because otherwise you end up with no background very close to your boundary. Okay, and I have another piece of Glad Wrap waiting in the wings, and now I'm just going to smush it. Now I might find that this background is a little too light, and I might have to go in and do a second layer of Glad Wrap over top of this first layer, but we'll wait and see. One of my best paintings, I did this exact thing. I did one layer of green background, and then only green, and I let it dry, and then I went back in and I went over top and I did one layer of blue background, only blue, and it was just gorgeous because the stained glass lines crisscrossed, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful effect. Same thing down here. Just going to lift up a little bit of the area where that Saran Wrap was stopped. Gotta be careful in the beak here. Now this area, because I've got the beak, I'm gonna do a really tiny area. I'm just gonna do that much. So I only wet from there up. Oops, I reached for the wrong blue. Happy accident, happy accident. Okay, drop some blue in. Drop some green in. Now this is a big piece of saran wrap, but I'm only going to do a teeny tiny area with it. Okay, really tinier is better, and that's about the right size piece for the bottom part. So again, I'm not going to clean my brush too much. Ooh. That's quite a bit of green, but that's okay. So wet the whole area. Drop in some bright green, and I'll also drop in some blue, and I'm going to lift a little bit. And I think we need some yellow, just a little bit of yellow, because I put a little bit of yellow in the top areas. Just a bit, just to give it some balance. Now, it is so tempting to lift off the Glad wrap to see how it's doing before it dries. You really need to err on the side of caution here and let that Glad wrap stay on your work much longer than you think it needs. Now, already I can tell that this is quite a bit lighter than down here. I'll probably have to go over and do that area again, but I'm going to leave this for a couple hours now and just let it dry on its own. It is now time for the big reveal. This is the exciting part. We're going to pull back the Glad wrap. Oh yeah, that looks great. Oh, I just love this part. Excellent. Now you can see there's one spot here where I didn't get close enough. And there's two tiny spots here where it actually leaked on top of my bird. I'm not going to worry about those two spots at all. I am going to touch up that spot. However, I'm going to add a little bit of shading to the back part of the seed just so it does look like it's in the mouth, and I need to put the middle of the eye in. I'm going to add a little burnt sienna at the top of the seed that's in the mouth. So it looks a little bit more 3D. Looks a little bit more like there's some shading involved in there. That's better. I'm going to add one red line at the top of this beak there just to give a little bit more definition. I'm going to fix that area there, but in the meantime, I'm just going to darken my eye. So I'm using the Payne's gray again. I'm not using black because this will be plenty dark enough. And if I find it's not dark enough, I can easily put the black on top. Some of my green background got on the bottom of my beak as well. So I'll need to fix that up. So I'm going to step back, take another look. Other than fixing up the beak, I think we're done. A really nice way to fix any color is to go over it with burnt sienna. And so I might outline the bottom of this beak with burnt sienna. It just is a really good, because it's already a brown, it's just a really good way of turning whatever color is already there into another shade of brown. And actually, I think that's probably going to be what I'll be most happy with, is going over that beak with burnt sienna. But again, I need to let that dry. I'm okay with the bottom now. So we are just about done here. We just need to put a tiny bit of white in the eye. This is gouache. It's also called permanent white. And it's different than Chinese white. It's more of an acrylic. So you can actually put it on top of any dark color and it will remain white. So I've just put a teeny tiny little bit in the corner there. And I believe my beautiful bird is done. I'm going to leave it overnight. I'm going to come back, take a look at it in different light, see if there's anything else that I want to do. But I believe we are at the end of this. So we'll see what it looks like tomorrow morning. Well, it's the next day and I've had a chance to look at this in some different lighting conditions and I'm quite happy with it. So now is the time for the big reveal. When you're pulling your tape off, you don't want to pull up. Pulling up will actually rip the paper. You want to pull the tape away on a 90-degree angle from the direction of the paper. So the paper edge is going vertically. So I'm pulling the tape horizontally. And the tape you want to use is a low tack tape or a painter's tape. Sometimes I use very inexpensive tape from the dollar store in Australia, Red Dot or the Reject Shop. And that's fine as long as I don't leave it on for more than a couple days. I've discovered that if I leave it on for more than a couple days, it will rip. So now we can see the beautiful edges on this work. And here we go. And it looks so nicely finished. Looks just beautiful there with the edges. Awesome. I'm very happy with this. So that's our Lorikeet. If you like this video, I ask that you please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I would love to hear from you. Leave me a comment and give me some suggestions on what sort of tutorials you would like, and I will take them into consideration. Thank you.